When Jason was, first conceived for the original film, he wasn't meant to be an icon. He wasn't the star of the film. He was sort of an afterthought, a chair jumper they needed for the last reel of the film. So the look of Jason was sort of put together, piecemeal. Tom Savini brought some of the visual aspect of the table. Victor Miller kind of wrote a little backstory for him, and everyone sort of kind of got together and kind of created this little crazy kid popping out of the swamp. And then when, part 2 came along, they realized, well, we have to promote Jason to, the main villain, so we have to flesh him out a bit. So that job fell to Ron Kurtz, the screenwriter of Part 2, who sort of conceived the idea that Jason had been living sort of as this feral kid in the woods, waiting for his mother to return. And then Tom Savini chose not to return for Friday the 13th Part 2, so they hired a makeup artist named Carl Fullerton, who took the basic concepts that Savini had created in the first film for Jason and just added to it. He added hair, a different kind of larger head, a bigger build. So Jason sort of slowly developed over the first 2 movies, and at the time, they just needed a mask, something to cover Jason's face. So they did some various makeup tests, and they chose what was kind of become known as the bag, which is just a burlap sack with a rope tied around it and one little eye hole. There was a movie that came out shortly after the end of production of Part 2 called The Elephant Man, and it featured a lead character who was deformed. He used to wear a burlap sack on his head. So when Friday the 13th Part 2 came out a few months later, suddenly there was this association between Jason and this character in this film, which was a very serious, dramatic piece. So unfortunately, when audiences went to see Part 2, suddenly they were thinking Elephant Man, and Jason wasn't that scary. So it kind of created an unintentional humorous aspect at the time. But now I think, 20-odd years later, for better or for worse, people remember Friday the 13th and Jason more than they remember the Elephant Man. So when people see Friday the 13th Part 2, they're not thinking that anymore. So a lot of fans now really kind of like the bag. It kind of has a creepy, kind of Deliverance kind of feel, backwoods feel to it. When Friday the 13th Part 3 went to production, the filmmakers realized that the bag wasn't working. So they decided we have to come up with a new mask. So they created a kind of a series of tests. They kind of just did different basic masks and different looks for Jason. And then just by chance, one of the crew members on the film had a hockey mask in his bag, pulled it out and put it on. And Steve Meyer, the director, was like, wow, that looks pretty scary.
One day we decided to do makeup tests in 3D to see what Jason would look like, because prior to Part 3, Jason wore a bag on his head in 1 and 2, and we didn't want to use the bag, and we didn't know what his face should look like, and everybody was arguing. And because we were from Buffalo and so many of us were hockey players, we actually had a team. Frank Mancuso Jr. was on the team, and we had a hockey team. And I had my goalie mask with me that day, and I kiddingly said, put on the goalie mask and then we won't have to worry about any makeup.
The infamous mask, as we all know it. This mask, unfortunately, is not the original mask. It is a replica of the original mask. Story has it that the original mask was left on a pole outside Marty Becker's office, and it sat on a pole for about 10 years until it eventually wilted away in the sun. The story that I know is that the mask was originally designed by Stan Winston. And we all know Stan Winston, number of Oscars he won and all the wonderful work that he's done.
The hockey mask is actually more than one mask. The original one was leather and fit Shelley fine. But the one for Jason, that particular leather mask when it was on was just too small, so we had to make a larger Vacuform mask as a copy from it. It took multiple stages of building it up to get to that point. Many people may not know that the mask is actually made from clear plastic. And I did that because I didn't want the paint to chip off the front. And so I painted it from behind. And the outside, the little red pieces are red acetate that are glued on with super glue. At the end of the movie, of course, you get the axe in it. That particular head is a copy of Richard Brooker's real head with the Jason makeup applied to it. And there's actually a 1/4-inch thick steel plug on the inside my hand fit into, because I'm actually puppeting that head when Dana hits it. And I didn't want the axe, of course, hit my hand. All that's fake at the end. When the camera's over Richard's shoulder, shooting her come up and hit him in the head, and you see the axe hit him in the head. I'm below it with the hand and my hand inside the head, and when I get the hit, I have to flip the axe handle up. And then it's a quick cut to the front with Richard with the makeup on with the axe embedded in his head already. It's just a prop to us. I mean, he looked cool in it, and it was a cool idea, and it was a great way to hide the makeup until we really wanted to see it. Nobody knew it was going to become an icon.
Who are you?
Well, after part 3 had come out, the producers started noticing that Halloween, a lot of kids were buying hockey masks and wearing them as costumes. And so they kind of realized, hey, the hockey mask is really resonating with the fans and the culture. So when Friday the 13th, the final chapter, went in production the next year, there was no question they were going to use the hockey mask. So they actually went back to the same molds they used for part 3, and they created the same exact mask. They did hire a new stuntman, Ted White, to play Jason. So there's a slightly different look to him. I mean, the mask is the same, but because his head shape is slightly different and his body type, he has a slightly different look, but it's pretty close, but the mask is exactly the same. I think every film, the filmmaker tried to look at what had come before in terms of Jason's look. They wanted to do something new and different to give Jason, somewhat of a different appearance for the fans, but at the same time keep consistency. So like, for example, in part 7, John Carl Buechler, the director, who was also the makeup supervisor on the film, he really wanted to maintain the mask, the consistency of the mask, and make sure all the markings and the damage, matched. So that mask was one of the fan favorites because it has the axe hit from part 3, it has the damage from part 6, but it's also been eaten away because Jason's been living underwater for 5 years or so. So it's kind of missing the whole jawline there. So that's a very cool mask. When part 8 came along, Rob Hedden, the director, decided to give Jason a new mask. Jason's been underwater without a mask for, again, a number of years. He gets resurrected. And when a character has a mask, and that's where Jason gets it from, so it's a fresh mask. It has kind of a yellowish look, because now Jason's more of a swampy kind of submerged creature. So he's very slick. Like, Jason in that entire film is just covered in slime. They used him up all the time, so he kind of looks like the Swamp Thing with a mask. At the end of part 8, Jason sort of gets toxic wasted to death. He gets melted, literally, and all that's left is kind of a mutated little mask. There was a sense of completion, so even if the series had not continued, the fact that Jason was truly killed for good and all that's left is kind of a little melted hockey mask sort of gave a little poetic feel to the series at that point, but of course it did go on.
If it had picked a different mask, it really would have, I don't know that Friday the 13th would have continued. I mean, if they had chosen a Bozo mask, for example, which kind of would have been a little frightening, but it's kind of interesting to play that parallel universe game and go, what would have happened had that been the case?
The hockey mask definitely has an element of strength to it I think a lot of the slasher villains didn't have. I mean, Michael Myers had a very sort of pasty, pale, ghostly, almost frail face. Freddy was burned, and he talked, a totally different kind of character, but Jason just had this machine-like quality. He's almost like a slasher movie version of the Terminator. So I think what the hockey mask gave Jason was a sense of indestructibility to him. You really felt that you were looking at a creature that was not going to be stopped.
The hockey mask, I think it works because it's blank. It lets the audience project their own fears onto there. What is there? What's under there? I don't think even after this movie, the part 3, that the hockey mask had become an iconic symbol. It wasn't until it had appeared in numerous movies that I think people really made the association of where now if you say hockey mask, people say Jason Voorhees.
Now he becomes this incredibly recognizable character. I mean, it's like Freddy's Freddy. You can't miss it. You can't mistake it. Jason's Jason now because of the mask. Once you see somebody with a mask on, you know who it's supposed to be.